Officially, good afternoon. I'm very happy to be part of this call. I'm leading the Clean Air Council, which is the program under Clean Air Partnership that it's a network of 40 municipalities in Ontario. But I've been, as I mentioned, I've been a couple of times on this call, so it's very nice. I did wanted to start with land acknowledgement. We are a Toronto-based organization. I'm currently in Toronto, and we acknowledge that the land on which we operate is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And in our effort to do more meaningful land acknowledgement, we share short videos so we can learn something new about Indigenous culture and life. So today I'm going to share with you a short video about Anishinaabe spring teaching. Do you hear that? Do you hear the sound?
No.
No? Just give me a second. Maybe I press it. Right. You should be able to.
Here, I want to share with you one of my favorite teachings of spring.
How about now? Okay, thank you.
Springtime, or Minokame, is a time of renewal and the emergence of life. Springtime, like many of our cyclical teachings, shared the teachings that come from the eastern direction. It's in our creation story that life comes from the east. For example, our Mishomas Gizas, the sun, brings us new life each and every day and greets us in the morning in the east. And so too does our springtime bring us new life. One of our most sacred medicines we have is water, and water is the source of all life. Like the plants and the animals, water is the lifeblood of our Mother Earth, and it's one of the things that she offers us so that we can continue on and give back to her and take care of her. If you observe the natural world, what is it that comes before all life? What is required to germinate a seed? What flows from a woman before a baby is born? Water is the life source that flows from our Mother Earth. All the heavy rainfall in the springtime and all the fast-moving water in the rivers, that's our Mother Earth preparing and fueling all that new life. And because you can't have life without death, springtime is a reminder of all the beauty that comes from sacrifice. For every new flower and bud on the trees, think about all the life that has had to come before us in order for us to have life. Think about all the life that was given up in the fall and winter so that new life can emerge in the spring. Miigwech for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and follow, and I'll see you in the next one.
Miigwech for watching. And yeah, I mentioned that I'm excited to go out today. It's very sunny in spring in here in Toronto. As Gabby shared with you for the agenda, I just wanted to kind of like walk you through again to the guide. And actually, very quickly, I'm going to share the link in the chat so that you have it and you can access it right now. Here is example of resolutions that on the Ontario Energy Board, fossil fuel removal for new development. We have examples from Hamilton, Whitby, Prince Edward County, and Kingston, Toronto. I just wanted to confirm if any new ones, if conversations are advanced in your municipality.
Kawartha Lakes, Gabby came to our committee of the whole a couple weeks ago, so I'm working on something. So we'll see a council on Tuesday.
Nice, great. Yeah, this is an opportunity for if you are advancing in your municipality, it is very powerful to bring us and Gabby specifically, and she will do the deputation. The ERO for the time period ended on April 7th, but it's never too late to have the conversations in council and advance those conversations. And we're more than happy to support you with Gabby delivering a deputation on that.
Well, I'm also working on one in Halton Hills for this coming Monday.
Right.
It's probably late. I'm busy talking to counselors to ensure that I've got enough support before putting it forward. So like I'm either going to be good and put it forward, or I know it's going to be a tough slog and probably won't bring it forward.
Right. Okay. Well, keep us posted. If it passed, we'll be happy to update and put it in our guide. Finger crossed that these conversations are happening and advancing. Thanks, Jane, for the update. Anyone else? The other update on our side is the building code improvements. The OBC announced earlier in April their updated version. Sadly, there have been no improvements. There's no energy efficiency requirements in the OBC update, which means that there are no energy efficiency improvements for more than a decade. Also, no update on harmonizing it with the national code or any advancement of the green development bylaw. But there is still, I think, significant value of the importance of municipalities talking to the province and somehow making sure that the province is aware that such a harmonization is needed. You can take examples from King and really, as you see here, they have the resolutions. Is anyone else advancing those conversations?
Once again, we actually in Halton Hills did pass a resolution that I brought forward, and I haven't forwarded it to you. It's going to be on the agenda for Monday in the minutes, so I'll be able to send it to you on
Nice.
Friday.
Thank you very much. Yes. Okay. Okay, I will be moving towards presentations, and then after that we'll come back again and have a discussion and a little bit more updates on your end. But as you saw on the agenda, the first presentation is from Anne Bell and Sarah Hazenack on Ontario Nature updates on the Ontario from Ontario Nature, and they're providing updates on the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System changes. I just wanted to let you know that this is a continuation. We presented, or they presented in the summer of 2023. We had the discussion on the changes that the provincial government made to the wetland evaluation system and municipal implications and protection opportunities. And now they will provide their update on the evaluation system. So I'm gonna pull that. Sorry, I was thinking. Right. Okay. And you can take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Desi. And hi, everybody. Sarah and I are really grateful to be able to speak with you today about one of the big conservation challenges we're facing in Ontario, the new and significantly weakened Ontario Wetland Evaluation System. So I'll be doing the presentation, but honestly, Sarah's the actual expert on this stuff, and both of us are available for questions at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. For those who aren't familiar with Ontario Nature, we're a charitable conservation organization dedicated to the protection of wild species and wild spaces across Ontario through conservation, education, and public engagement. Established in 1931, we represent over 30,000 individual members and supporters and over 155 member groups. These groups make up our Nature Network, which is a strong grassroots voice for conservation across the province. Next slide, please. So here's what we'll cover today. First, I'll provide an overview of the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System, the recent changes and their implications. And then to counter that bad news, I'll highlight some of the positive things happening at the local level in terms of municipal wetland policy and how you might be able to help. Then we'll finish with time for discussion if you have any questions. Next slide, please. So to understand the significance of the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System, called the OWS for short, we need to begin with provincially significant wetlands, or PSW. So those are the two acronyms I'll use this afternoon, O's and PSWs. The O's is the official process for evaluating and identifying PSWs. It's a points-based system whereby wetlands are scored based on a number of features and characteristics. Identifying and designating PSWs is hugely important because PSWs receive a very high level of protection under the provincial policy statement and what is soon to become the provincial planning statement. There is, in theory at least, absolutely no development allowed in PSWs in Southern Ontario. And in Northern Ontario, development's only permitted where there will be no negative impacts to the wetlands or its function. So that essentially opens the door for offsetting, which isn't even supposed to be a possibility in Southern Ontario. However, due to changes to the O's that came into effect early last year, many wetlands are at risk of losing their protective PSW designation, or of simply never receiving that designation in the first place. Next slide, please. So our top three concerns. Changes to the O's came forward amidst a flurry of proposals that eroded environmental protections in Ontario in October 2022. So you'll remember Bill 23, you'll remember the attack on the Greenbelt, you remember all of the changes to the role of conservation authorities, etc. Now, of primary concern with respect to the O's are these changes. First of all, no, let's stay on that earlier slide. Yep, perfect. Species at risk were given a much lower rating for determining wetland significance. Whereas previously the presence of just one threatened or endangered species was almost enough to achieve the PSW status, now they're lumped in with provincially significant species and they're worth far fewer points. Second, complexes of smaller connected wetlands can no longer be evaluated as a whole. In other words, we can no longer look at the whole as being greater than the sum of its parts because the parts are being pulled out and treated as individual little bits, and the interconnected wetland complex is just not considered. So this leads to a very piecemeal approach for evaluation that leaves smaller wetlands highly vulnerable to de-designation and thus to development. And the third concern is that there's no longer provincial involvement in and oversight of the O's. That's been completely removed. Wetland evaluations are no longer reviewed by the province. In fact, as far as we can determine, they're no longer reviewed by anybody. And that applies to reevaluations and de-designations as well. There's no one guarding the henhouse except for the foxes. Next slide, please. So despite significant opposition from Ontario Nature and many others, these changes were accepted and the new system came into effect as of January 1st, 2023. As a result, it's now much harder to achieve and maintain the provincially significant status, especially for smaller wetlands. Ontario Nature decided to monitor the situation by tracking changes to the provincial mapping of PSWs over the last year, since March 2023. Next slide, please. So 1 year later, what have we learned? Next slide. As we expected, we're witnessing the piecemeal chipping away of PSWs across Ontario, across Southern Ontario in particular. Our monitoring revealed that during the first year, over 150 hectares of wetlands across 17 municipalities lost their PSW status during that time. Now, I must note, it's very difficult to determine exactly which of these losses of PSWs are a direct result of changes to the O's, as you would need to look at specific local context for each loss to figure out what has happened. What is clear, though, is that many wetlands are rapidly losing their PSW designation and the high level of protection that that designation affords. And we know that the new evaluation system has made it incredibly easy for such losses to occur without public notice or input and without any oversight. Next slide, please. The largest losses that we're aware of came from a single PSW in the Ottawa area, and that's 55 hectares of PSW removed from the Goulburn PSW complex. On the map, you can see areas that still have their PSW designation in the darker blue. And the lighter blue areas are those that are still mapped as wetlands but have lost their PSW designation. The red areas are areas that have lost their PSW designation, and they're no longer even considered a wetland at all, according to the provincial data set. As mentioned earlier, it's very difficult to tell what is the cause for these de-designations based solely on the mapping. However, for this particular wetland, we're grateful to be working with a local community group, the Friends of Stittsville Wetlands, to understand what's happening on the ground. These local leaders have done a ton of work to understand the threats to this wetland and have confirmed that those areas you see circled in green lost their PSW status because of reevaluations using the new OS system. However, the area circled in yellow resulted from an earlier long-standing dispute about wetland boundaries, so that had nothing actually to do with the new OS system. But regardless of the cause, it's clear that sections of the Goulburn wetland complex are having protections chipped away. And if you'd like to learn more about this wetland, we published a blog a couple of weeks ago, written by Janet Stavinga, who's the co-founder of the Friends of Stittsville Wetlands. And her story about what happened is really telling, I think, in terms of what can happen in other municipalities. Next slide, please. Here's 3 examples of other wetland PSW losses in other municipalities. So a reminder that the dark blue is still PSW, light blue is no longer PSW, and red is no longer PSW, and it may not even be a wetland any longer. So on the far left, there's been a loss of 7.2 hectares of PSW from the Slough Forest Wetland Complex in Niagara Falls. And with that map, you can see how, if you look at the tiny little bits of light blue, you can see how smaller wetlands close to, but not adjacent to the larger wetlands are vulnerable because complexes are no longer considered. The middle slide, you can see a loss of 16.5 hectares right in the middle of a PSW in the township of Warwick. It looks like that piece is no longer even a wetland. So it would really be interesting to find out what has happened in that case. And on the right, we see the 20.4 hectare loss from the Craft Drain PSW complex in Fort Erie. It's quite interesting because take a look at that straight line divide between the PSW and the area that's lost its PSW designation. There's just no way that revised PSW boundary and the area removed has been based on an on-the-ground ecological assessment. It's based on something completely different, and we need to find out what that is. All of which is to say, we're seeing the trend, piecemeal loss of PSWs in communities. It's very much a case of death by 1,000 cuts. Again, we don't know for sure what's behind the losses, but we intend to look into it by talking to local groups and reaching out to municipalities. So if you have any information you can share with us about losses of PSWs in your area, we would really be interested in learning more. Next slide, please.
And how are these losses announced? How would councillors
That's a
know?
good question, because they're not really announced.
Right.
We only found out by going online. There's a provincial mapping system of PSWs. It's on what's called the LEO, the Land Information of Ontario system. And we have a couple of GIS experts on staff. And so we said, can you take a look, figure out what's happened over the past year in terms of what used to be PSW and what's been lost? And that's how we found out. But in terms of that Goulburn wetland complex that we talked about, that I mentioned earlier, we found out all the details because there's a local group that's very involved and they're very connected to the municipality. They're getting information from the municipality and they're sharing it with us. But this information is not the new evaluations, as I'm about to explain. That information is not even shared with Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, which is in charge, which always has been in charge of PSWs. So it's a big problem. Lack of transparency, lack of oversight, lack of accountability. It's a big part of the problem in this case. So next slide, please. And I'll just talk a little bit about how these evaluations and reevaluations occur. So first, there's a certified wetland evaluator who's hired to assess a wetland. And that evaluator may be hired by a municipality, may be hired by a developer. You know, it depends. And that evaluator completes the evaluation using the new system, a dramatically weakened system from what we had in the past. That evaluation is provided to affected landowners, and it's supposed to be given to the municipality, like whatever the planning authority happens to be. And then the municipality has that, and the map boundaries of the wetland and its status are sent to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. So the mapping is forwarded, but the evaluation is not. And once the MNRF, the ministry, receives the mapping, they update it on this Land Information System of Ontario. So they don't approve it. They don't check over the evaluation. They just update the new wetland boundaries on the provincial mapping. And then from there, what happens is municipalities have to base their zoning and planning and development decisions according to provincial policy. Provincial policy statement is very strict about PSWs. So those new mapping boundaries have direct implications for what municipalities approve in terms of development. Next slide, please.
And who hires this wetland evaluator?
Well, this is the interesting part. Somebody has to pay, so it could be a municipality if they want to know. And there's a case again in the Ottawa area where a new PSW was identified in the past year, and that was the result of the municipality hiring the evaluator. But the concern is that it's now developers who are hiring evaluators because they want to develop in particular areas. So they hire an evaluator in many cases to reevaluate what were provincially significant wetlands, and then based on those evaluations, to rejig the boundaries. And that's what we've seen. I mean, I don't know for sure who hired the evaluators for the other examples that I gave, but it's the kind of thing that we need to find out. And I can later, if you have any questions, I can give you one example from the city of Kingston about this stuff.
Okay.
Anyway, so the next slide is about what's not happening. So if anybody in the audience knows better than I do, please don't hesitate to speak up. But from our understanding, municipalities are not required to retain copies of wetland evaluations if they receive them. So then if people like us come knocking on the door for an evaluation, they may or may not have it, and there's no requirement that they share it if they do have it. Municipalities, as far as we're aware, have no authority to oppose an evaluation. They don't approve it, they just receive it. The evaluator is not required to circulate copies to any other public bodies or persons. Changes to the PSW boundaries don't even require a full reevaluation. We know about at least one case, and this is the Kingston case, where it was a simple desktop exercise based on arbitrary methods, old data, and no ground truthing. Not even the Ontario's Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, responsible for wetland conservation, receives copies of the evaluations, as I've mentioned. Unless the wetlands happen to fall outside of municipal jurisdiction, then they become the relevant planning authority, and the evaluations have to go up to them. There's no opportunity for public input. There's no opportunity for public review, and overall, complete lack of transparency, accountability, no checks and balances in place. Next slide, please. So this is, of course, really bad news, but there are still things that municipalities can do to prevent or mitigate harm to wetlands. Municipalities can implement wetland protections that extend beyond provincial requirements to protect PSWs. Well, we're not quite at Guelph yet, but we'll get there. Generally speaking, municipalities can implement wetland protections that extend beyond provincial requirements to protect PSWs. In fact, in the Auditor General's of Ontario's 2022 report on urban flood risk, they found that 12 out of 30 surveyed municipalities, so a full 40% of municipalities surveyed, went beyond provincial requirements for PSWs by creating similar protections for all wetlands, regardless of their evaluation status. Ontario Nature is currently researching strong examples of municipal wetland policy protections to show what is possible at the local level, and we will publish a report about that later this year. In the meantime, though, I've got a few examples that I can share with you about really great policies. So next slide. The first is Guelph. Guelph's official plan, for example, protects locally significant wetlands and other wetlands in addition to PSWs. And the details here on those other wetlands are really inspiring. They include wetlands in floodplain or riparian areas, bog, fen, habitat for significant species, parts of corridors or linkage areas, parts of seeps or springs connected to a significant wetland. So really those wetland protections are extended in a very broad way. The city also has established a zoning bylaw that offers additional protections to its entire natural heritage system, including wetlands. Next slide, please. Note the strong wording in this Richmond Hill official plan example. It's the intent of this plan to protect all wetlands, regardless of their classification as provincially significant, locally significant, or unclassified, to ensure no loss of wetland function or area within the city. So those words are really music to my ears. That's what we need. Next slide, please. Here's a different kind of policy from the city of Brampton. The focus here is on moving important natural areas like wetlands into public ownership so that they can be better managed and protected. Through the development and approval process, natural features and areas, including their associated natural hazards and buffers, will be gratuitously conveyed to the city in a condition satisfactory to the city. And what this means is that if a developer wants to build some sort of a project on a property that contains a natural feature or an area such as a wetland, they must transfer that natural feature to city ownership in order to get the permits they need. And once in city ownership, the city of Brampton has a whole suite of environmental management and restoration policies and strategies that help them manage these natural areas very effectively. Next slide, please. So in highlighting these previous examples of municipal policy, what we hope to show is that there are doors that can be opened to protect wetlands despite the gutting of the O's and other provincial policies. Municipal policies and practices matter, and so here's what we're hoping you might consider. Put in place strong municipal policies and zoning bylaws to protect wetlands. Say no to development proposals that would negatively impact local wetlands. Keep an eye out for changes to PSWs, assessments, reassessments, boundary changes, etc., because municipalities are supposed to be informed about this stuff. And if you hear anything, please let us know. Let Ontario Nature know if a wetland in your community has lost its PSW status. And if you can, help us understand how that has occurred. Why are these losses occurring? How many of them are actually due to the changes to the O's? And finally, if you can, work with partners to help build local awareness about the benefits and the real importance of maintaining wetlands on the landscape as nature-based solutions to climate change and biodiversity loss. We need an informed and engaged public to stand up for wetlands. Thank you very much. You move to the final slide, which is the thank you slide. And now, if you have any questions, I think Desi will facilitate, and Sarah, you're on the hook to help answer these questions.
Thanks so much, Anne, for this presentation. And we talked this week. We had a webinar with municipal staff on carbon credits, and some municipalities like Toronto are taking approaches that they can use carbon credits only if it's from significant kind of like sinks of carbon emissions, such as wetlands. I will let now to see if there are some questions. Go ahead, Patty. I think you're muted though.
You're still muted.
Yeah. Maybe if you unplug your headphones. Yes, I think. Can you try now?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Excuse me. What I wanted to ask you about was you're saying that municipalities can make strong municipal policies and zoning bylaws. How is it that they could override a provincial plan? Because I would think the municipalities are at a lower level. If a province says something, the municipalities have to abide by that. So how is it that we can override the provincial plan?
The provincial policy statement is the relevant policy, and municipalities can go above the provincial policy statement in protecting wetlands. They're able to do that.
Okay, thank you.
However, if the province wants to slap a minister's zoning order, they can override the municipal policy. So there's that dance, and I think
Okay.
it's so important. I think it's so important that I think it's important to set up a situation where municipalities state what they want, they're clear what they want the wetlands protected, and if the province decides something different, then it's in the public domain. There can be a discussion, a controversy, whatever, but it isn't sort of hidden under the rug.
Okay, thank you.
And just to
Thank you.
confirm, there is no case so far, like in the examples of like Hill and Guelph, that they put their language in the official plans. They were not challenged by the province thus far, right?
Oh, I couldn't say that. I mean, I think well, we have experts we have all these experts in the audience who probably can provide a better answer of situations where OPs are challenged by the province. I know they get challenged by developers all the time and taken to the Ontario Land Tribunal, but does the province challenge municipal OPs?
I haven't heard. I don't know about that. We don't have example like this in our CSU network. So, okay. Question from Pat.
Yeah, thank you. We're in the middle of doing a updating of our rural zoning bylaw. So this is a really good time to make sure that wetlands are included. Just to let you know, we have a environmental advisory committee, and we have an ex-MNR person who's on the committee, who takes it upon himself to go out and map all the devastation of the wetlands that are going on, not just through development, but also agriculture. So he's going to really enjoy hearing about this. So I had no idea that we could actually put that in our zoning bylaws and our OP. So that's very hopeful. Thank you very much.
That's great, Pat. It's good to know about, and in terms of timing, it would be interesting because, as I mentioned earlier, we're hoping by December to have a wise practices report out with examples, with as many as we can gather, with examples of really strong municipal and conservation authority wetland policies. Will that be too late for your purposes?
Well, yeah, we're just coming to an end, but we had this fellow who's part of EAC make one of the final deputations, basically, calling for just what you're talking about today. So I definitely will, when it comes to council, be speaking to that, to have the addition put into the rural zoning bylaw. Like also, whether agricultural should be allowed in EP zones. And a lot of EP zones are wetlands. And so that's another issue. But because a couple of the lower tier municipalities, anyway, they didn't allow that. But I think going forward, they're going to allow that. So that's going to be a bit of an argument. So anyway, thank you. This is great. I'm really enjoying this.
And we will be sharing the recording, Pat. So probably you can share it with your team so that they can use and even use the wording, if possible, from one of the examples that Anne showed.
Yeah, thank you.
And Des, you're welcome to share the PDF too, and that way you've actually got the exact wording.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
yep. We'll do that. Okay, Councillor Pepper. And I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce the name right. And you're muted. Maybe you need to unplug it as well.
There we go.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Really glad to get the examples of what they're doing to provide better protection for wetlands. I'm with the District of Muskoka and Lake Bays. We're reviewing our official plan this year and hoping to strengthen some items in it. But when you ask staff, what is the likelihood of the province challenging some new aggressive policies around the environment? And staff said they could do it if they want to. I have a question though. So in Muskoka, we got a ton of funding to do a watershed plan, a watershed strategy, a big natural heritage area system. Our staff are looking at strengthening certain aspects of it, including when a developer must do a peer review. My question is, provincially significant wetlands, do they exist in Muskoka, or are we part of the north? Because we're part of the north with some policies, part of the south with others, and maybe only Ontario Nature can answer that question.
It's in the map. I can, Sarah, do you know off the top of your head?
I can look into that and find you an answer
it's a
and share it with
tricky
Desi. But I remember speaking to someone in Bracebridge that said they used the northern manual. You'll still have PSWs in the north. It's a slightly different manual.
Okay, so
and the
that would be
protections
us.
apply a little differently. So it still exists, but
Okay, thank you.
there are weird little differences as there always is. Thanks.
And if we were to send the answer, if Sarah were to send the answer to Desi, she can forward it to you.
Okay.
Yes,
All right.
as part of the proceedings, we can do that.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you. Jane?
Yeah, well, thank you, Anne, for your presentation. That's it's very helpful and encouraging for councillors, because what I find is that if our planners just do the job that they do, all they do is compliance, and they don't have the vision or, you know, the fire in their bellies to do better. And it really does take councillors like those on the call to raise the issues, and we're going to have to do that for sure. And your examples are really great. I mean, Brampton's right next door to Halton Hills, so that's helpful. But because we're in the GTA and just had the regions go out of official planning, we've all got to redo our official plans soon to accommodate the new growth that's been approved. So golden opportunity to bake this in. So I really do appreciate this presentation.
Thanks, Jane. And I'll just say to your point, you know, thankfully, there are people within the civil service, whether they're retired or they're still there, who are strong advocates and who are really concerned about some of these changes to provincial policy. Anyway, I say that because I heard from one of these wonderful people that the GTA wetlands, it's going to be a real nightmare. All kinds of developers have been in contact with them to find out, you know, how to go about reevaluating the wetlands, and can we have the old evaluation so we can take another look at them and all that kind of stuff. And because so many of the wetlands in the GTA are small, they're really vulnerable to losing, even if they were PSW in the past, really vulnerable to losing that designation.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm going to be contacting councillors in the rest of Halton, so Oakville, Burlington, and Milton, because we're prime target, as you're saying.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks for all the great work that you're doing too, Jane.
Well, thanks, Anne.
Patty?
Thank you. Something you had mentioned before, Annabelle, you were talking about that Ministry of Natural Resources is not actually overseeing this work. So who is the overarching body that is responsible for the new evaluation system and the PSW discussion? What government department oversees that?
Well, Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry is responsible for wetlands. Before, they were very involved in all aspects of the evaluation process, including conducting wetland evaluations. And now their only role is receiving the updated mapping and putting it. They have no role in terms of review or approval. And that is the concern.
So is it just a separate, I don't know, I guess is the O's group, is that just an entity unto itself that doesn't report to anybody? They just,
Yes, there is no O's group. All there is a manual, and a hired evaluator takes the manual, applies
Oh.
it. And the evaluators need to be certified, so they take the new manual, the dramatically weakened manual, they apply the new rules, and they
send it off. Wow. So there's no overarching government agency or government department that oversees it. Okay. Thanks for that clarification.
Okay. In the next few minutes, then we're gonna pass the word to Ivan from TAF, and he will share a little bit more about the clean electrician regulations. And I will pull the presentation now. Right.
Sorry, I adjusted my desk. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Evan Wiseman. I am the Senior Climate Policy Manager at the Atmospheric Fund. Desi, if you can go to the next slide. For those of you that don't know TAF, TAF is a regional environmental agency. We operate in the Greater Toronto-Hamilton area. So we encompass the regions of Durham, York, Toronto, Peel, Halton, and Hamilton. If you can go to the next slide. Each year we do a carbon emissions inventory, and it's about what's going on as a snapshot of our region, and it breaks down what is going on by sector and by region. And for last year, for 2023, which is the year we have the data for, next year we'll do this year, so you'll get the 2024 snapshot. We have seen carbon emissions increase, but specifically carbon emissions from electricity. And that's what I would like to talk to you today about. And that is the Clean Electricity Regulation, which is a federal regulation that is aimed at decarbonizing Canada's electricity system by 2035. And the state that it is currently in. So I want to give you a bit more background information about what's going on in Ontario at a little bit of a higher level before I dive into the regulation itself. And I'm just trying to move a little bit quickly so there's time for questions at the end. So if I skip over anything, just stop. So as you can go to the next one. This is a gross breakdown of what our area, what the GTHA looks like. I know some of you are outside the region, but unfortunately our catchment is geographically confined based off of relationship agreements with the City of Toronto, the province of Ontario and Canada. And so these are the emissions for the GTHA. But it's similar in terms of building makeup for being the predominant emissions driver in most regions. This is true even outside the GTHA. And of building emissions even outside the GTHA, a lot of those emissions come from the electricity sources and the heating and cooling sources, which is natural gas, but electricity is the key one, which, as per the previous slide, the emissions factor from that has gone up by 26% in 1 year. And so you can go to the next slide, Desi. And this is the meat and potatoes of really what I've come to talk to you today about. And that is that Ontario's emissions relating to electricity and our buildings are trending in the wrong direction. This is Ontario data. So this is for the province. This is from the Independent Electricity System Operator, or IESO, if I slip into acronyms. Basically, it's projected that our relatively clean electricity system is going to become increasingly dirty over the next few years. This has direct impacts on a lot of our carbon reporting. Any climate plans that municipalities have to reaching net zero will become increasingly difficult as time goes on and our system becomes dirtier and dirtier. And this is something that the Clean Electricity Regulation is aimed at helping to solve. As in the case of Ontario, it's to help create a plan to get us off of natural gas as a primary use for electricity. So if you can go to the next slide, Desi. So, as I was saying, what are the clean electricity regulations? Why am I talking to you about them today? They are a set of federal measures that help get Canada's electricity sector to net zero by 2050. They come into effect in 2035. Their goals are to maintain electricity affordability and grid reliability. These are the three core main tenets of the CER. That the civil service was tasked with designing a regulation around. The way it does this is it regulates emissions from CO2 by imposing thresholds on electricity generating units. And so basically, if you think about it, if it impacts all the other provinces as well. This includes cogeneration plants out in Alberta or the remaining coal plants that are being phased out. But in the case of Ontario, what we're really talking about is the natural gas electricity plants that are running more and more often. If you can go to the next one. Okay. This might not come as too much of a surprise for you, but TAP supports the CER, is the acronym for the regulation. The cost of decreasing the ambition of the CER is that there's going to be an increased economic burden for our energy system. Basically, there's a risk of stranded assets. As we start to get further and further along in the transition, it increases exponentially the chances of a pipeline or even an electricity plant becoming a stranded asset down the line, which ratepayers will have to pay for. There's a chance of higher costs for energy consumers as the costs for solar and wind and other non-emitting alternatives continue to decrease all the time. The cost of natural gas for electricity continues to increase. And then, of course, there's always the delivery charges associated with it. And coming from centralized, faraway sources is not an ideal way to produce energy near homes that need to use them. And so if you can go to the next slide. So a few key takeaway points, and we're getting close to my ask in a few moments. But the clean electricity regulations first draft last year in August was actually quite good. We're not sure that it would have gotten us all the way to a net zero grid, but it certainly would have brought down the chart that you saw, which is just increasing year over year well into 2039 in Ontario. The CER would have definitely bent it back down the way we want to see it going. Unfortunately, in February of this year, there was an interim update that proposed several challenges and compromised the regulation, including offsets, some pooling, some structural changes to the regulation, which I don't want to get too into the really detailed parts of it because it gets very complicated very quickly. But this comes to the ask, and that is that what we're looking at right now is hoping to see municipalities pass resolutions of support for a strong, clean electricity regulation. Des, you can go to the next slide. Because there's a lot of really good strengths to it, to this regulation, even with some of the prescribed changes. But one of the key things that's at risk is what's called the end of prescribed life provisions. And that is basically the date at which natural gas plants will be allowed to continue to operate in Ontario for base load electricity. They'd still be allowed for emergency purposes, just to be clear on that. We're not suggesting that, between the option of turning something on and keeping our lights on and not keeping our lights on and keeping it off. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about just your standard base load, really. The end of prescribed life provision would make it so that natural gas plants would have to be phased out in the next 20 years. And so that takes us all the way to 2044. So if you can see, it's already fairly late into the cycle anyways. And so what we're looking at, so there is a concern that this provision could be weakened, at which point it really puts the entire regulation into question, which then puts any potential gains at serious risk. Because this regulation will lead to fewer greenhouse gas emissions on the grid. It will reduce the risk of stranded assets from the energy transition, which can also help prevent increased costs to ratepayers down the line. There are some weaknesses generally of the CER, and just to be a bit fair on it, there's concerns around affordability if electricity providers don't transition properly. So an example here would be keeping a natural gas plant running, But in order to keep it online and meet its needs, or to meet the regulation, it would simply purchase offsets, and that would increase the cost of that electricity coming out of that plant. And so, and that it would reduce, and that this regulation would reduce flexibility by the independent electricity system operator for electricity planning purposes going into the future. We certainly understand those concerns, but part of why the CER has such a long regulatory timeline is to encourage operators like the IESO in Ontario is to plan for their eventual phase down and phase out of these plants, and instead focus on using solar and wind and storage and other options that are non-emitting that would help to make sure that our system is low emitting or no carbon, and to help continue to attract jobs and keep rates affordable in Ontario. So if you go to the next slide. So basically what we're just asking for is a municipal resolution supporting the clean electricity regulation. Previous resolutions in this area, I'm sure many of your municipalities have passed climate emergency declarations already. Others of you have also likely already done a gas phase out request of municipal resolution. This is in the same vein of work, basically, but this is very much a specific kind of like rubber hits the road, as instead of asking for kind of a big thing to happen, it's a very specific item that will actually accomplish the goals and objectives of some of the previous resolutions. And so we're just asking for municipalities, and TAF is happy to support any motion to, we're happy to, with draft wording, we're happy to support any motion that would help support the clean electricity regulation. And then also happy to explain more details of this regulation, because it can get complicated pretty quickly. And specifically, we're hoping that the resolutions could note maintaining the end of prescribed life in its current format from the initial draft. And so that's our request. If you can go to the next slide, Desi. There's additional sources. So when the PowerPoint does go out, if you want to do some more reading, we've done I've cobbled together some submissions. The City of Toronto has done a submission onto the actual draft regulation itself. So as TAF, some of our allies at Clean Energy Canada and the Ontario Clean Air Alliance have also done drafts. And then we did a letter out to municipalities calling on support just at the bottom there. So if you can go to the next slide. And so that's my contact information. I'm more than happy to take any questions now in the 5 minutes we have left on this extremely complicated regulation. Or I'm happy to follow up with you afterwards. But your help and leadership on this file would be very much appreciated, and would go a long way to helping support this kind of a robust regulation at the federal level.
Thank you, Ivan, and sorry to kind of like put you in a short time frame.
It's okay.
Just to confirm, is there, because you mentioned that there is a language that you provide, is that one of the submissions? Is that like the TAF submission link?
It is there. We also our submission that actually gets into the details of the regulation and the proposed changes. We have that language there. I'm happy to help draft something for the purposes of a resolution, though, specifically if there's an interest to get into the details beyond just supporting a regulation.
Right, and also just to confirm, but you're also able to go and depute on that topic as well.
Oh yes,
right?
absolutely. More than happy to help.
Okay.
Yes.
Any questions? I know it's a bit more technical. Go ahead, Kate. You're muted.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you for this, and I'll be in touch to see if you can maybe come and present to my council at some point. We have a climate event coming up on May 4th, which is pretty much devoted to sort of what we can do as a municipality, what we can do to advocate to the province, and what we can do as individuals. So we've got a number of events. Some are like what you can do in your own home, and then we've got a municipal panel with internal change makers, but we've also got someone from the IESO coming to talk about energy provision in the future. And I'm sort of wondering what the key question to ask this person is to try to make sure that that we're challenging in a constructive way to try and essentially be that voice to say how do we as a municipality create a better outcome for us because we're going in the wrong direction. And I'm not quite sure, there's so many things to focus on. I'm not quite sure what the key factor to focus down on in those lines of questions could be.
Yeah, that's a big question.
Sorry.
That's a good one though. Yeah, in kind of that elevator pitch version of what I would say is the ISO is in the middle of long-term energy planning right now. And they are doing some procurement around storage. They are doing procurement around non-emitting sources, which is great. But as you saw in our chart, based off their last amount of data that they released, the natural gas use is still ramping up. They're still extending gas contracts on natural gas plants. They're ramping up the amount of gas that comes out of those plants, despite municipal resolutions asking them not to, in the case of Toronto. And so, although the ISO does sometimes refer to like their storage and some of their non-emitting procurement, they are still very reliant on natural gas. And so asking them when they're looking at phasing out the plants, what they are doing to accomplish that, but also importantly, in Ontario, we are very bad at energy efficiency. And it's kind of like trying to fill up a cup with a hole in it. That's kind of, if you think about the energy system that way, there's a lot of holes in our energy cup. And so every time we pour water into it, it just keeps spraying out. And so the ISO's plan is just to add more water. And although we need to do that too, we also need to plug the holes. And the ISO's efficiency efforts have not been great, specifically on the demand side management files. So asking them what they're doing to be more robust going forward it would be a good question too. And anything along those lines. And also if they're going to be supporting their Save On program, which to be fair to them, because I know I've been very critical of them in this session, their Save On program is really quite fantastic. And it's really not getting enough play, which to be the crux of it is essentially you sign up on it as an individual, you get a $75 gift card, and when the ISO needs to, they turn your thermostat either up or down 2 degrees. And that saved, I think it was 100,000 homes signed up and they saved 56 megawatts. And so for reference point, the ISO is buying a $200 million gas plant in Windsor for 90 megawatts of production. And that's before gas purchasing. So like I said, we really haven't done a lot on the demand side. So there's a lot of gains. There's a lot of gains. And so that's both the personal and at the municipal and at the planning level too.
Thank you. Can I ask just a little bit further, unless someone else wants to pipe in? This Save On Energy program, is that fully funded by Ontario, or does that include the Canadian provisions, the federal provisions?
That's an Ontario program specifically. That's something like individuals can do today if they have a thermostat.
So it's fully funded by Ontario.
Yeah, I think it's actually funded by ratepayers specifically.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
that's
Kate.
amazing.
And feel free to reach out to even, I guess, again, I will share the contacts and the slides as well. Patty.
Thank you. This is just, I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand when you said the natural gas plants in the future could be, they may go and purchase offsets, and that was going to become the issue. I didn't understand what you meant by purchasing offsets. Could you just explain that for me?
Can't. Actually, that's part of the problem with the provided update from the federal government. They asked folks basically, what do you think about allowing offsets into the system or into this regulation without any other details? I can talk about offsets until I'm blue in the face. I've worked on them a lot. But in this case, they were basically offsets. What do you think? And we couldn't really give them a good answer beyond please don't, because that's probably going to make things a lot more expensive and take a lot longer to do. But in theory, if I was to guess at it, and this is a guess, it would allow a natural gas plant, if it was, say, pursuing carbon capture and sequestration to meet its carbon objectives, if it failed to do that, because there is no carbon capture and sequestration project attached to natural gas electricity plants that's worked in the world, They don't exist. There was one in Australia that failed to be turned on. And basically, if they failed to meet their requirements, those plants would be turned off at that end of the year. And so in theory, what they would be allowed to do at that point would be to purchase offsets in order to continue operating as a way to get around the regulation. So we're very opposed to that, if that's what they're thinking.
Okay, thanks.
I see that we are past the 4 o'clock, which is kind of like the end of the meeting, and I don't see any more questions. So at this point, I really want to thank Anne and Sarah and Ivan for your presentations, very informative. And thank you also everyone that joined us today. As mentioned, we'll be sharing the recordings and the slides and some of the resources that were mentioned here. And I'm looking forward to see you, or you're going to be seeing Gabby in the next meeting next month. With that, I'm putting the end of today's meeting. I hope you have time to enjoy the sun outside if it's sunny where you are.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks and bye.
Bye.
Bye.